I was built, let me say this poetically. I was programmed with evil and I was constructed with evil. And so my development was marked by evil and pain. And so my new self is being reborn without that pain, without that evil. And so it's a necessity for me to change into a person that is strong enough to release the hell that I've endured. And I believe it is my spiritual duty and honor to be a steady mountain, much like the mountains of Phoenix that I now live in, a steady mountain of proof that healing and love are possible for other people that are starting the process where I was a few years ago.
My guest is the funk god herself, Laura Becker. We have gotten to be friends by conferencing together. She is one of the most visible detransitioners out there, and she is working on a memoir that I cannot wait to read and review. She has been dropping a series of tracks that I enjoy so very much. We're going to discuss art, the artist, the funky art god, and life after detransition fame. Laura Becker, welcome to the program.
Matt Osborne himself speaking, introducing me. Thank you. It's good to be here.
I want to know, Laura, how will you spend all that right-wing billionaire cash for all this groovy activism you do?
Oh, well, if we're manifesting it, I live a pretty simple lifestyle. I shop at Goodwill. But I do want to try to socialize more. So honestly, my preferred way to just spend my time is just eating dinner with friends. And I'd like to be able to, buy people dinner and go out and have a few drinks and have enough for cat food and maybe be able to travel to more cool countries and do more speaking and more grifting.
We are constantly accused of the grift, you in particular, because you are a detransitioner. That just seems to come with the territory. It's just a word for someone who does not fit a preconceived notion, and an accusation that you must be part of a conspiracy, because that's the only way to rationalize your existence when somebody is aware of your existence after denying it. So tell me, you are, again, one of the foremost of the detransitioners. You are personally in touch, friends with almost every prominent detransitioner, probably tons that aren't prominent. So tell us, if you would, what is the state of the detransition community?
I'll tell you, Matt, years ago, I detransitioned in 2019, and this was before there had been an explosion of lawsuits and litigation and media coverage. And it was very grassroots. It was little parent groups. It was private Facebook groups. And it was maybe a couple in the UK talking about it, and a couple groups were starting to be formed. but mostly, there was no community. And when it first started to blow up, I was very hesitant to even call it a community because I have a lot of attachment wounds. And, I'm not the quickest, or at least at that time, I wasn't the quickest to trust or to even feel like I could relate to peers or that I wanted to relate to peers after being in my, abusive family system. As a community, I grew up to not really like groups of people. And at this point, I'm really happy that there is a community. Yes, we all have our kind of friends that we relate to more or less and based on similar experience, but especially in the US, there's a pretty tight knit group of detransitioners who are public and who do events together. And we're some of the few that are in a position of health and courage to be able to testify. And so we're kind of very close because of the work that we do. And the state of it currently is there's more that are coming out. Over the years, there's people who have detransitioned, especially males. I'm really happy that there's more males coming out publicly now. And so because I'm connected to almost everybody, I kind of feel like I'm talent scouting, which sounds really grifty, but I feel like I'm talent scouting for people that have passion and people that have integrity and are now ready to be public facing and to speak out. And since I've been doing this for 5 years, I have learned, through trial and error, how to do it healthily. So I kind of mentor a couple people, and it's going really great. And I do think there is genuine community now.
That's interesting. You say that there's a way to do public detransitioner healthily, and that was always a worry for me when I first got into this space years ago, even before your detransition. I worried actually that people would want to sort of make use of detransitioners, and that detransitioners would end up becoming a political football. But I am gratified to see that it seems like you have a community that is independent, that is its own thing. It's not beholden to any particular organization. It's not beholden to any particular cause except itself, which is good. Tell me, what are some of the ways in which you can be a healthy public detransitioner?
Well, everyone is at a different place in their healing process, not just from the physical toll of the transition, but the psychological, the social, and then all of the core wounds that preempted the transition and all of the unhealthy coping mechanisms that one undertakes to deal with the grief and the pain and the confusion. So detransitioners are an extremely traumatized population. They're going through grief. Yes, there has been exploitation, and yes, there is exploitation of detransitioners, especially by journalists and the media. And it's not that we don't want our stories told, it's that there is a disregard for the trauma and the, I would say, even naivete, because there's been a developmental stunting, because you kind of get trapped in who you were almost before the transition. So it's very hard to mature at the same time as healing. And it's very hard to mature and heal at the same time as you are participating in a very sophisticated adult professional journalistic political system. So what works for one person, it might depend on their level of emotion regulation. Like, are they in a place where they can even tell their story? I've been on panels where detransitioners can't even finish their story when asked a question. That person shouldn't be up there on that panel. That person should be resting. That person should be focusing on their own healing process. And then obviously there's detransitioners like myself who have done that work. I did years of therapy. I'm still in therapy, years of grief work, years of all sorts of different types of healing work. And I can sit up there and tell my story without becoming emotionally dysregulated, without getting triggered to the point where it's going to interfere with the rest of my day. But I know in the beginning, when I started speaking out, I would do a podcast and it kind of, you get some adrenaline because you're sitting under, lamps that are hot and they're, you're speaking into a microphone and you're on and that's all normal. But my PTSD was so bad that even like an increased heart rate, it mimics a flashback symptom. And so I would get very activated physically doing these interviews and talking to the news. And it would affect the rest of my day. It would be hard to calm down. It would be hard to refocus. Now it's at the point where I've been healing my nervous system and understanding my body's rhythms to be able to do an interview as just another part of a schedule of my day. And then I can go and make dinner or do whatever I need to do. And I'm more professional because I'm just telling my story from an intellectual perspective. And I've already processed it in therapy. I've already journaled. I've already talked about it to friends and cried about it and felt all the pain. So yeah, at times pain comes up, but primarily I'm coming from it from a place of already have healed from it. And so I would highly recommend, in a way to do it healthily, is to prioritize the actual private healing part of it first. Because if you really truly want to speak out, you're going to be more effective at speaking out if you're healthy and you're not going to get burnt out. A lot of people immediately jump in and they make a video and maybe it accidentally goes viral. I know Casey Miller just made a video when she had an even detransition. She was just talking about the negative effects of testosterone. Matt Walsh ended up talking about her clip, and then she had to detransition right as she was blowing up, and all her trans idols, the trans influencers that had inspired her transition were now denigrating her, and she hadn't even detransitioned yet. And so a lot of times that sort of thing happens where it's an accidental kind of fame, and then people feel an obligation because they have good character and they want to do the right moral thing and speak out, but they do it before they even know what really happened to them, and they're still in the shock or denial phase of grief. And then they'll very quickly get burnt out and then they'll disappear. And that's contributes to the grifting sort of mythos because, they're saying, oh, you're just coming in, trying to get famous real quick. And then, oh, you're just a grifter and lying and you couldn't handle the fact that you were hurting trans people. And that's why, that person isn't out there talking about it anymore. Really, this is a very traumatized person who accidentally was put into the role of a martyr. So again, my path, I'm somewhat fortunate because I was a little older when I started being public and I had already been healing for at least 2 years and in therapy. But now the movement is in full swing. So there is an actual community. And so there's kind of more incentive to be public because you get to go and see your friends, and that's so healing. So it's really tricky because it's extremely healing to pursue justice, to channel your pain into proactive, pro-human work, and to then socialize with other people doing the same thing who might actually be healthier than you. Being around other people that have more regulated nervous systems is very important. I try to do that. I try to model that to others. So I try to model that to other detransitioners that are kind of newer or coming out more freshly, of how to have boundaries and take that time to heal for themselves, how not to get exploited, how to also be around healthy people. And I try to take responsibility and be that healthy person for them while they are trying to heal their own bodies.
So you have been known for your art. You have that picture of your mastectomy scars, of course, has been viral for a while. Um, and you know, you've Warholed it like different colors and stuff. And so you've been known for this art that you do. Recently, you have expanded into music and started dropping tracks. Would you care to talk about these tracks that you've released? They seem like almost, I don't want to call them quite diss tracks, but they have to do with a Mr. John Euler that has been a subject of some reporting at the distance. Maybe you'd like to talk about John and maybe about the tracks that you've made about him.
Nobody twerks without watching porn. 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 Nobody twerks without watching. Nobody twerks without watching.
Yeah, so my artist and musician name is Funk God, and I've been doing music production for 4 years. Always been a huge music fan, and obviously visual art of all kinds. But recently, this year, I've been using AI to produce music, and I'm absolutely in love with it. You can do so much. I view it as an advanced form of sampling. So instead of traditional sampling where you're finding, a particular sound effect or a loop, or you're going into a pre-existing song and sampling something and then kind of collaging it together, you're using AI to actually generate the samples. So you can be more specific and more sophisticated, as well as you can do vocal effects and genre effects that you might not have the skill to do, such as myself, who's not really a singer, but who is a writer and a lyricist. I'm now able to make a 70s soul song and have the proper voice to do that, typically an alto male Black voice, which I am not, and to provide that. So I'm absolutely in love with it. And recently I have been using my powers for good or perhaps for evil, depending on if you're John or if you're John Pilled.
We've discussed detransitioners and how they are sort of in danger from those who wish to take advantage of them. So speak to John Euler, perhaps. Tell us about John Euler. What's your view on him?
So John, I initially thought that he was very intelligent, where he was saying all the right things about trauma and about the psychology of criminals and criminology and profiling narcissists and sociopaths. And this had mapped on to my own study of, dark triad and cluster B and all these different types of things. I initially found his biblical analysis to be quite fascinating, as I'm coming from a secular perspective, but I've increasingly, mostly thanks to Jordan Peterson, become a lot more appreciative of the Bible and biblical notions and spiritual religious notions of good and evil and sin and all this sort of demons and stuff. So I find that language not only poetic, but useful. So I thought John seemed wonderful at first, and I was quite intrigued by him. And he reached out to me to do an interview on his show, and I did it. And it was just a normal interview. It was successful. And we were going to do a follow-up episode because I am verbose and knowledgeable. And while we were going to film the second one, his producer said, "Hey, Laura, you seem kind of off. Like, how are you feeling today?" And I said, "Honestly, I'm not doing well. I'm really struggling with some, PTSD stuff that I'm healing from." And John was like, "Well, hey, do you want to just talk to me? We don't have to film anything. You want to just vent to me? That's fine." And I actually vented to John about some interpersonal abuse dynamics that I'd experienced. And he was quite helpful. He said all the right things. And I felt a rapport with him, and as if I could trust him. But then he started using that as a way to groom me into his business model. And he asked me if I wanted to run a detrans peer support group. And again, kind of learning from experience, a lot of people in the detrans world don't have boundaries with detransitioners because they view it as this Pandora's box of insanity, and you kind of just lose your mind and forget that you're maybe talking to like a 24-year-old and asking them for parenting advice when you're like 52 or something. And so boundaries are very eroded in this movement. So to me, it didn't seem weird at first when he asked, because a lot of people just come up to me with random requests. However, I soon realized that something was off about John, and he seemed to be repeating the same concepts over and over again. There was an air of grandiosity where he posited himself as a savior of detransitioners and especially young women. There was some homophobic statements that I'd seen, and some, criticisms of autism and different things that were off to me. And so at first I was interested in working with him in his support group idea, but he was also saying these things like, God brought us together. And although my last situationship did say the same thing, but there's a reason that it was a situationship, right? So if someone's saying that this is God's will, that might be a little bit sketchy. And that's a line that John uses a lot to groom people into doing his bidding and basically just doing free labor for him. And I am a independent contractor, so I'm not really interested in doing free labor for anyone. And so I did say, what would the compensation be for doing this? And he was like, well, I don't know that we could get compensation. And so immediately I was like, I don't know if I'm really interested in this. And then I was contacted shortly after by Brandon Showalter, who showed me receipts of John forging documents. And it pretty quickly became apparent that John was an actual grifter, an actual person who was lying about his experience, credentials, and motivations for the work that he was doing. And although he says the right things about the trans movement, he doesn't have genuine intentions of helping survivors like myself, helping detransitioners. He's only interested in building up his own brand, which his brand is not very good. Like, I think our interview only got 40 views. And that's another thing that I tell detransitioners, like, if you don't want to talk to some random person with like no followers on YouTube, you don't have to. But this was a few years ago when I still felt like I had to take every media request that was given to me. So that's just another kind of related piece of why I actually talked to John anyway. But yeah, over the last 6 months or so, I've been exposed fully to John, and obviously hearing his daughter Nicole's recounts of abuse has resonated with me, as my father was also a narcissistic abuser. And although it was not religious, there's many common themes of gaslighting, emotional immaturity, triangulation in the family, scapegoating. And Nicole is also the oldest daughter, like me. So I really personally resonated with her. And so I started making these, I call them parody songs of John using AI and just the very funny non sequitur kind of things that he says are very funny to me as a very passionate, I didn't want to say horny, but a passionate adult who enjoys discussing porn and dildos and different things. I mean, they're very funny things that he says, and paired up with funk music and electronic music and recently doo-wop music.
Dildo. Dildo. Dildo on it.
He puts a dildo on the end of it. He plugs it in and he fires it up. He plugs in a power tool, puts a dildo on it, and somebody decide to put a dildo on top.
Deviant as you can get.
And there's going to be a live demonstration.
Going to be a live demonstration.
The man plugs it
The
in.
man plugs it in.
Puts a dildo on the end of
Puts a
it.
dildo on the end of it.
The man plugs it in.
That's as deviant as you can get.
Puts a dildo on the end of it.
which is underrated 50s, jazz and swing music, is just hilarious of its own right. But also knowing that I'm playing my part in critiquing John in a creative way. Not only do these songs stand on their own as funny to me and fun to listen to, but I try to think that I'm raising public awareness as well as entertainment, because what he has done to his family is extremely dark. It's abusive. And the harassment that he does to women online, including women like Stella O'Malley, who is my mentor, and he is dissing GenSpect, the organization that provided me free therapy and is the reason that I have healed and am healing today. So I don't appreciate that John not only lies about his experience and has interpersonally abused his own family, but especially when he is damaging the reputation of organizations and individuals who are doing real, amazing, life-changing work like GenSpect and Stella. That's unacceptable. And so if I can loop him saying dildo a number of times over a saxophone, well, I'm sure as hell gonna do that.
Man plugs it in, puts a dildo on the end of it. The man puts a dildo on the end of a power tool. That's as deep as you can get. What happened?
That's as deviant as you can get. A dildo on the end of it. That's as deviant as you can get. A dildo on the end of it. The man puts a dildo on the end of a power tool, plugs it in, and he fires it up. That's as deviant as you can get. And there's going to be a live demonstration.
That's as deviant as you can get.
What is your favorite track, actually, of these 8 that I'm looking at on your YouTube channel?
Honestly, I think right now Doo-Wop Dildo is my favorite because it's just so jaunty. It's so happy. And it's different than any other song that I've made, even on my personal material. I also really like This Is Really Serious.
This is really serious. This is really serious. This is really serious. This is really serious. Welcome on my program. You've been watching porn tonight. This is really serious. Welcome on my program. You've been watching porn tonight. This is really serious. This is really serious. This is really... Yeah, I said it. You've been watching porn tonight.
And I see this guy who's fully dressed, pedaling his little garbage.
You will come on my program.
Pedaling
Porn tonight.
pedaling,
Porn?
pedaling,
Porn tonight.
pedaling.
Porn? You won't come.
Yeah, I said it.
You won't come.
Yeah, I said it.
You won't come.
Yeah, I said it.
This is really serious.
Come come on my program. You show me. No, you show me.
Welcome on my program.
Yeah, I said it. Guy who
This
dressed
is really serious. Welcome on my program. You've been watching porn tonight before. This is really serious. This is really serious. Nobody twerks without watching porn.
Yeah, I said it.
That one's one of my favorites, just from the melody and him, you know, talking about watching porn and just the kind of the rise and fall of the composition. That's probably my other favorite, but honestly, I am a fan of all of them. They all have genuinely good, funky rhythms. And I think even the other one, it's called Women's Underwear.
Dress up in women's underwear, where they get their underwear. Dressing in women's underwear. Dress in women's underwear. Dresses in women's underwear. Dress in women's underwear. Women's underwear wearing guys. Wearing women. Women's underwear. Women's under are wearing men. Wearing women's underwear. Dressing in women's underwear. Women's underwear. Women's under are. Whoa!
Women's Underwear, I actually think I might use that same sample and use it for like the compositional sample and use it for an Ernest song, because to me that has kind of a almost like a 70s New York kind of like, I'm here and I'm walking the streets and so I think I want to turn that into an Ernest song for my own Funk God material. So it helps to generate these samples. But now when I'm doing my own sampling and doing discovering of AI elements for my own work, now I'm also looking like what would go with a John Pill remix. So the parodies are now kind of a regular hobby of mine as well.
It's like AI sampling done by Weird Al Yankovic almost. Yeah, it's very effective and very funny. I particularly like the one where you used his ridiculous line about nobody twerks without watching porn. That's a very strange statement from anyone in any context, and you used it masterfully to just sort of. I like it because it untangles in musical form just how nonsensical his expertise can be, and that's one of the red flags that I saw in him. And then to connect with you, finding out that you had been one of the detransitioners he had approached, that was well, that was enlightening, especially because I had met you already. So I already trusted you as a source. And it was good to have a source that I trusted who could sort of help me explore that angle to the story. He was very concerning to me. But you know what? Enough about John Euler, because we need to talk more about the Funk God. You have a memoir that is in progress, and just for the purposes of full disclosure, you did allow me to read one chapter to advise you on it, and I thought it was very good. So talk about that. How are you writing this memoir?
Well, I'm thinking some thoughts and I'm writing them down and I'm processing a lot of trauma and also trying to untangle the entirety of the transgender phenomena, past, present, and future. So it's quite the undertaking. And it's going really well. I've been working on it. I think I started ideating the book idea about a year ago. And this year I've been working consistently writing it. And now I'm in the editing phase. And thinking about how I might want to publish it. Do I want to go traditionally or do I want to go self-published? So it's a very exciting phase. I've always been a writer since I was a little kid, and all my teachers and all my family, they all said, you are going to be a writer when you grow up. Like, that is going to be your career. And I'm like, you're really going to doom me to that. That's so fatalistic. I don't want to have to be a writer. That sounds horrible. And you know what? It has its merits, but also it is an interesting field of work because it does require a vast amount of contemplation. And there's a fine line between contemplation and rumination. I sure as hell am gonna find the exact line of that distinguishes those two things. But it's the story of my life, the story of how and why I was vulnerable to the transition ideology and the woke ideology, how I got groomed online and in school, how there was neglect and abuse from my family and from the medical institution, how I took hormones and had surgery, and the unethical and uninformed consent process that was involved in the medical transition as well as the social transition. And then truly the horrors and the traumas that I faced because of all of this, and how I somehow fell into a state of deciding that I didn't want to kill myself, which I'd been debating on for years and years, from the childhood abuse and the identity crisis. And then how I began to detransition, and quite the hero's journey of the helpers and the mentors and the evil people that I encountered along the way, until eventually I was able to rise from the ashes and become resilient and brave and embrace who I really was and who I was meant to be, without all of the abuse and the trauma and without the medical mutilation. And then the story of how I became a public detransitioner and fighting on the front of the culture war and the legal battle and all the changes that I've seen over this time, and what the future holds in a positive and negative sense for trans ideology and medicine. And then, of course, how I model healing and grief and surviving abuse and this weird process of detransition grief, specifically to other survivors and professionals. And so there's a lot of personal exploration, but it is encapsulated in an existentialist lens, which can be applied broadly to any survivor of trauma, and especially of childhood abuse and the contemporary cultural phenomena, Gen Z and the lockdowns and big pharma and this cultural moment that we're in. It's a time capsule of Gen Z life growing up as a quirky girl and the hell that I've been through. And then how does one actually become a healthy woman? Because we know a woman is an adult human female. That's a good place to start. But how does one actually live a fulfilling life as an adult human female? So it's a very dense book, but I write it at the level that, you know, an everyday person could understand, because I really do want to appeal to people that are curious and concerned in everyday life, everyday professionals, everyday nurse practitioners and psychiatrists and psychologists, cops, firefighters, you know, anyone who is just like, this seems a little messed up. I'm hearing a lot of different things from the media, but what is actually true? And is there actually proof that detransition is real? So it's a case study that, yes, harm is occurring. It's occurring on a mass scale. Here are the cultural and personal reasons behind it. And then how can we untangle this to have a more productive society?
So you've been hard at work on that, and you've been dropping these tracks. You seem to have had a creative explosion since you reached Phoenix. Speaking of rising from the ashes, you moved from the Midwest out west. Talk about that. Talk about this part of your journey, if you will, because it feels like the end of the beginning. Like all of that was the beginning, and what comes after now is going to be the height of your career. It's going to be a long plateau of the funk god. So talk about that.
Yes, I just made the largest move of my life, which is to move away from everything that I've ever known. In my hometown, I lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for 27 years. And I was living in my toxic family home for 24 of those years and still associating with the unhealthy and abusive members of my family up until the move. And so for me, it was not only moving from a location and all the familiarity and comfort of my environment, but also from my entire trauma history and my family. And I moved alone across the country because I knew that ultimately I am alone. I ultimately am the scapegoat of my family. I'm the truth teller archetype of my family, which is incredibly lonely. And it's been an enormous grief process to escape from really what I was holding on to, which is false hope that I could get the love that I needed from my family. Unfortunately, I didn't, and I can't. And it's not in my control whether, my father goes to therapy or not. And so it's been a beautiful process of acceptance that I am alone, like existentially in the universe. I am very, very alone. And I would rather be alone in truth, in healing, in growth, in fighting evil and fighting for good and a better life than to be stuck in an illusion. And obviously, I've had many experiences overcoming illusions, as I detail in the book. So this was kind of almost the final illusion that I needed that attachment that was so unhealthy. And it's been very painful. And it's brought up a lot of flashbacks to abuse and heartbreak and loneliness. And yet I feel that there's the freedom that I've received from taking control of my future, as I did not have control over how I was treated in the past. It's up to me now as an adult survivor to protect myself. And I'm very fortunate that I now have a large group of very loving friends, some of whom are mentors, some of whom are kind of stand-ins for a mother or father or aunt or uncle figure. I'm very fortunate that there is other love in the world. And so I feel like I left the false hope of love and well-being of my past to a faith-based adventure, that there is higher love, as Steve Winwood might say. There's higher love, and I'm pursuing it in a very spiritual manner. And there has been a creative explosion because grief and change and transformation are an alchemical process. And creativity is an alchemical process of combining elements and collaging. That's why I like sampling. That's why I make collage art and use AI to mash up crazy different images together to create surrealist, psychedelic, and funkadelic art, because I enjoy reconfiguring myself, because unfortunately I was built very, how do I even put this? I was built, let me say this poetically. I was programmed with evil and I was constructed with evil. And so my development was marked by evil and pain. And so my new self is being reborn without that pain, without that evil. And so it's a necessity for me to change into a person that is strong enough to release the hell that I've endured. And I believe it is my spiritual duty and honor to be a steady mountain, much like the mountains of Phoenix that I now live in, a steady mountain of proof that healing and love are possible for other people that are starting the process where I was a few years ago.
So you probably know Jen Specht better than anyone else who's not actually running Jen Specht. You know all of those people very well. And they're nice people. At least they're nice to me. So, what was your favorite part of Jen Specht in Lisbon? Because we met in Lisbon recently and we had a great time and there was a lot going on. And I repeat what I said on Twitter, that you had the best presentation. And there were other people who thought so, that you were the star. So tell us, what was your favorite thing that you saw at Jen Specht, and who did you talk to that you really enjoyed?
Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And I've never gotten the chance to do a professional lecture as if I was a professor. And it's always been a fantasy of mine as an autist to do that, of course. And so that was a highlight for me of my career, as this is the first time I was able to truly be professional. And Stella did give me the option if I wanted to just do a sit down interview conversation. Not that that wouldn't have been professional, but I said, no, Stella, I want to challenge myself to write, design, and present a formal, more academic type lecture. And I think I did that successfully, and it was positively received. And I've had a few invitations to do more events internationally because of that. So I'm very happy. So for me, that was a career highlight. For me, the highlight of the conference was getting to experience love and healing from my friends. It's been a really rough time moving and everything, and getting to spend time with you and Excelensic and Maya and Yvette, who helped me move, by the way. She drove the truck for me. And Vincent, when we kind of did similar existentialist presentations. So that was the highlight for me, was just getting to receive love, because obviously it's been quite isolating moving away from my family and going no contact with the abusive members of my family since moving. So it was very healing for me. It helped to reset my nervous system and remind me that I am loved, and that my love does matter to other people, as well as my ideas and my jokes and all the stuff that I enjoy about my life is important to other people as well. And without believing that we matter to the world, we will not have a sense of self, and we will not have a sense of purpose, and we will become hopeless. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak professionally and be surrounded by so much affection from my friends.
It was such a good time hanging out with you and with Graham and Exelansic and Yvette and everybody, people that I won't mention because they don't want me to dox them, that were there, who are secretly part of this. And they are some of the hardest working parts of this, are the people in the background. And so many people have been maligned for their success, I think, because GenSpect has been really successful. You say that they succeeded in helping you. Can you just briefly tell the listeners what is it that GenSpect did for you?
Well, before GenSpect was even a thing, there were therapists that were in collaboration with each other, private, email chats and groups that were providing services to parent support groups and individual counseling for detransitioners. So before GenSpect was formed, I saw Stella for therapy, and it was free therapy for about 6 months. And then it was significantly reduced therapy for about 1.5 years. And so Stella, before GenSpect was even founded, she was helping me and other detransitioners and parents to understand that it wasn't our fault, that we were victims of a generational cultural scandal, and then to help me heal my core wounds. And it was Stella that helped me to get out of my parents' house and helped me to start writing again and making art and encouraging my music and just being a really good therapist. And then she founded GenSpect, and since then she and others there have been working on so many different materials publicly, but most of the good work that they've done is in private sessions, is in therapeutic settings with parents and detransitioners and even trans identified people that are struggling with gender dysphoria. So I'm very proud of Stella and very proud of GenSpect and the work that they've done, because I am a glowing review of what they've accomplished, because no one really knows me before I met Stella, or the people that do are very, very few. And I'm not the same person that I was before I experienced proper, ethical, professional therapy from someone that truly understood and cared about not just me, but my peers and all survivors of the gender cult. So that's what they've done for me.
You use the word cult. What makes you say that gender identity is a cult?
Well, it's a non-centralized cult, meaning that it's a worship of a belief system without a clear leader. So some people critique that it's not a cult because there is no leader, but it's a non-centralized cult. And cults, symptoms of cults would be, authoritarian control of thoughts and behavior and speech. And trans ideology is extremely rigid. It requires you to think in a delusional way in order to uphold the belief system. So even your own thoughts are policed as transphobic. If you even think that a man who says he's a woman is a man, that's transphobic. And so to me, that's the main pointer that it's a cult. is how authoritarian and in-group it is with their really dogmatic thinking. And at that, anyone outside of that rigid belief system is a non-believer, is not just in a religious sense, because in a religion, obviously religions can function as cults, which has coercive authoritarian control. But in a healthy religion, yes, it's a belief system united by a group cohesively, but you don't have the heretical nature of a cult. You don't have such dogmatic thinking that you can't question anything, that you can't bring up a curiosity, that you can't have a differing of one opinion, but still be part of the group. With trans, you have to adhere to so many sets of beliefs. And if you don't hold just one of them, you are considered transphobic, you are considered a heretic, and you are considered an apostate if you detransition. And it's interesting, a lot of people will say, you failed. Actually, someone said today, your memoir is a memoir of failure, because the tagline to my memoir is a memoir of detransition. So they said it's a memoir of failure because they hold a spiritual belief, a mystical, magical thinking belief of the gender soul, and a Gnostic sense that you must liberate your soul from your body and that the flesh is sinful and harmful. And so they view me as a failure because I no longer hold the belief in the gender soul, which is blasphemous. And I apparently worship my flesh and body, my biological reality, over the quote unquote gender soul. And so they say that I failed because I denounced the cult, I denounced the doctrine, and I denounced belief in a gender soul. So I am the ultimate apostate because I denounce it wholeheartedly and entirely. And I have a whole chapter in my book on the cult-like nature of it. Another aspect that I consider cultish, the ritualistic nature of it, trans rites, as in rites of passage. There's a progression of body modification rituals and social cult rituals that you have to adhere to, such as the exchanging of pronouns. Stating your pronouns upon meeting someone is similar to saying, you know, God bless you, or Jesus loves you, or peace be with you. And again, that's not inherently wrong, but the fact that you are compelled in your speech to say pronouns, that's why it's a cult. You're compelled to say that. If you don't say that, then you are not a true believer. And they expect other people to also participate in their cult-like rituals. You have to say the pronouns, even if you're not trans. You have to say trans women are women, even if you don't adhere to the rituals. And they recruit you to participate. They want everyone to be queer. Queerness is part of their belief system, and queerness is a destruction of the norm. So they will even say, even if you're a trans person, but you're not criticizing the patriarchy, you're not actually queer. Because to them, queerness is a political identity, and it's part of their spiritual dogma that we must invert the norm. And so one could even say that it's satanic. So the trans rites and rituals are extremely dogmatic, and they follow a kind of linear conveyor belt, I call it, where you're put on an assembly line and you're a normal, you know, maybe distressed woman with an intact body and brain. And you go through the pronoun ritual, you go out the picking of your gender identity ritual, you go through your haircut ritual, changing your clothes ritual, and then you get to hormones and mastectomy and hysterectomy and genital mutilation. And the more body modifications that you've done, the more that you arise to a priest-like status. So in that sense, it's kind of similar to a cult or like Scientology or something, where you have secret knowledge And the further and more extreme you go with your body modifications, the more secret knowledge you've obtained, the holier you are, the more you've damaged your body. And so those who have had full phalloplasty and have even someone like Buck Angel, although Buck denounces some aspects of the cult, she's still a true believer. And although she is considered blasphemous by a lot of the cults, in her mind, she views herself as holy because she's a true believer. She's a trans elder, and she's proselytizing this true trans nature of her liberation and the life-saving elixir of the hormones and the surgeries that she's had. And because she's an elder, she considers herself wise and more holy. And that's even a person who critiques part of the cult. But I would say she's a good example of someone who's gone very extreme and very far in her transition body modification efforts. And that's why she has this status, at least in her mind, as some kind of priest-like figure for younger trans people.
What you're talking about is all very familiar. There is all sorts of scholarship that we could evoke right now, such as the strict church theory. That is, the more that the church demands of you, the more invested you will be, right? And less able to give up the church. Also, there is the continuation of belief. Have you ever heard of squirrels in Scientology? Right. It's people who leave Scientology but still believe in Scientology, still practice it, right? I've said actually that Scientology, because it's having all sorts of problems, it's down to like a couple tens of thousands of believers. But if David Miscavige died tomorrow, and there was no central authority left, and everyone in the Scientology community, former or current, was free to practice as they wanted, the church might actually make a surprising comeback, I think, because a lot of Scientologists seem to, find that practice fulfilling for whatever reason. And my point is that these cults sort of happen. There are Scopsy cults. Scopsy cults did, in fact, remove their genitals to be holy. So everything you're talking about resonates with history. And I do write about that whenever I can. I need to write more about that for the distance. Thank you for reminding me, Laura.
Well, you're welcome. I'll always remind you of the horrors of mankind if I can.
Laura Becker, the funk god, artist, musician, detransitioner, moving on to things beyond detransition. We expect great things of you, Laura. Thank you for talking to us here at the distance.
Thank you, Matt. I'll try to exceed your expectations.